Hello and welcome to this webinar on anxiety. What we propose to do here is to see what is anxiety exactly and how we can help our animals overcome it. Well, what is anxiety? Anxiety is an emotion which generally is characterized by an unpleasant state of inner turmoil. Often it is accompanied by nervous behavior when you see the animal pacing back and forth with somatic complaints, shortness of breath, sweating, dizziness, restlessness, muscle aches. Muscular tension is a big item in anxiety. Restlessness, where again, with a pacing around. Fatigue, which we may not always think of, but it can be quite exhausting to be in a state of anxiety constantly. And also animals, when they have trouble concentrating, that may also be a big signal that they are suffering from anxiety. Now, anxiety and fear, they're not exactly the same thing. Fear is a response to a threat which is real and immediate, or at least we perceive it as a threat at that moment. It's something real. For example, if a lion were to come towards you, or a bus were to be coming towards you, careering down the road, seemingly out of control, that would be a situation for fear, because it's something real that's happening there and now. Anxiety, on the other hand, is not usually to do with something that's happening in that moment. It's usually generalized, perhaps because of a fearful experience which happened before. And because of that fearful experience, the animal foresees or expects something bad to happen under certain circumstances. So it's like an overreaction to a situation that is subjectively menacing to the animal at that moment, even although objectively speaking, it may not actually be a threat. So from the physiological point of view, how does anxiety affect? What is it really? Basically, anxiety is associated with overactivity in the brain. There are too many neurons firing in the brain all at the same time. When neurons are positively charged, they fire, and glutamate increases the positive charge. So glutamate is a neurotransmitter. That is a chemical that nerve cells use to send signals to other cells. And glutamate is by far and away the most abundant neurotransmitter in the nervous system of vertebrate animals. That includes us and dogs and cats and so on. When neurons are negatively charged, they are prevented from firing, and GABA, which is another neurotransmitter, prevents the neurons from firing, whereas so GABA increases the negative charge. So basically, to reduce or prevent anxiety, the brain needs less glutamate activity and more GABA activity. But just to know these things, we don't have to go into the neuroscience of it for this webinar, but just to know that this is why it's happening. So some oils that can influence the activity of glutamate and GABA. Roman and German chamomile block the glutamate receptors. So this means that they help reduce anxiety by preventing the neurons from becoming charged and active. Valerian and Passionflower make it easier for GABA to bind to the GABA receptors. So this helps increase the amount of GABA and therefore increases the negativity in the neurons, and therefore they're not going to fire. Valerian, hops, and German chamomile also inhibit general anxiety disorder, and so that also increases GABA levels. So you can see here that the essential oils that we work with in zoopharmacognosy may be helping to reduce anxiety, but not necessarily all in the same way. Some, like Roman and German chamomile, are going to block the glutamate receptors, whereas others will help the GABA receptors to do their work more efficiently. And therefore, both in their own way are helping to reduce anxiety. So looking at glutamate. Glutamate is the anion of glutamic acid in its role as a neurotransmitter. And as we've said, it's by far and away the most abundant neurotransmitter in the nervous system of all vertebrate animals. GABA is also a neurotransmitter, but as we've said, it inhibits activity. And it's very widely distributed in the neurons of the cortex of the brain. So GABA contributes to motor control, to vision, and many other cortical functions, and it also regulates anxiety, as we've just seen. General anxiety disorder is a disorder which is characterized by excessive, uncontrollable, and often irrational worry. That is, apprehensive expectations about events or activities. And you might see this, for example, a dog that is terrified when it goes out on walks of the rubbish bins or cars parked by the roadside or electricity poles. And it doesn't really know why it's afraid of it. It just is. It may have had a previous negative experience and we may not know about it, but it's generally an anxiety disorder which is generalized and uncontrollable. The animal doesn't know how to deal with the situation. So now, what are neurotransmitters? Neurotransmitters, we could think of them as messengers. They are chemical messengers which send signals across what is known as the chemical synapse. Now, the synapse is like a space between one neuron and another. So the message comes up from one neuron and it jumps over the space to the next neuron with the help of these neurotransmitters that we've been talking about, like GABA, glutamate, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, and all of these things which you hear about when you read advertisements for supplements and so on. So let's look here at some of the basic oils that we might be wanting to use in cases of anxiety. The main ones, and there are lots of them, are bergamot, copaiba, frankincense, geranium, German chamomile, which we've just mentioned, hemp, hops, linden blossom, marjoram, neroli, orange, Roman chamomile, St. John's wort, spikenard, valerian, and vetiver. So these are the main ones which we would be offering. Then we've got other, like the supporting cast, you might call it. So these are also calming substances like calendula, which may be offered as a macerated oil or as CO2 extraction, barley grass, which has lots of minerals in it, which can also help, coconut oil, lavender essential oil, rice bran, and also tobacco. And sometimes the anxiety may be due to an emotional block which the animal has had perhaps for a short time, but it may even have been for quite a long time. So oils which may help with emotional release would be angelica root, yarrow, and rose. Now, rose could be in the form of essential oil or as a floral water. When the animal is more sensitive or young or old, then sometimes they would prefer the floral water to the essential oil because it's a little bit more gentle. Now, the oils that the animal may choose and that we might offer depending on the symptoms can affect the body in different ways. For example, anxiety may produce diarrhea. It can produce digestive disorders. It can produce cognitive dysfunction, which we would see as a lack of concentration. It can also give rise to nervous behaviors. And this means that the oil which may be most indicated at a given time may be different depending on the circumstances and the symptoms which the animal is presenting. So, knowing the properties of our oils, we may have a good idea of the selection that we might offer, but we've always got to remember that in zoopharmacognosy, we are not prescribing. So, based on our knowledge, we can make a prior selection of oils, but in the final analysis, it's the animal in question who must have the option to choose. Sometimes we may be completely off target, and the animals will lead us to the right path by choosing if we listen and observe their responses. So this means in practical terms that we must always be open-minded and not think that we know best, because the animal is maybe clearly showing us that he or she wants something quite different from what we are offering at that moment. So let's look at some of these things one by one. Barley grass has lots of magnesium, and magnesium helps to calm and balance the nervous system when it's affected by anxiety. And this is especially important when we're working with animals in shelters, for example, or in rescue environments, because their diet is often deficient in magnesium. Lots of other dogs which are eating dried food may also be deficient in magnesium. So diet is an important thing. Also, the high levels of anxiety that animals experience in shelters and rescue environments can affect the digestion, and this means that important minerals are not being digested properly, and this exacerbates the behavior problems that may have led to them being abandoned and brought to the shelter in the first place. So magnesium is an important thing to bear in mind. Bergamot is another oil which animals often select, especially when the anxiety manifests on the skin as a skin disorder. Like the other citrus oils, bergamot essential oil is stimulating, so it's often chosen by animals that are depressed or low, and it helps to disperse the negative emotions that may be giving rise to that state of anxiety in the first place. So basically what it's doing is helping to balance the emotional system. Calendula, just thinking of the flower, that bright orange, yellowy orange color, is uplifting. So anxiety, again, calendula often will be useful to animals who might choose it if their anxiety is affecting the digestive system or the skin. And it's really quite a favorite one with animals who are having skin problems for one reason or another, as I know from one of my dogs who chooses it all the time. So also calendula infused oil is antispasmodic, which means that it reduces the spasms in the intestinal system, which can be giving rise to diarrhea, for example. Also, it's believed that calendula imitates the effects of steroids, and this is one reason why it's effective in treating skin disorders. It's also a comforting oil, as we've said. Just looking at the flowers is comforting. Another option, instead of using the infused oil, is to use calendula obtained by CO2 extraction. Now, until very recently, we didn't have that. We were only using macerated or infused oils, but this is another option now that people may want to use. Copaiba is a plant from South America, and its main component is beta-caryophyllene, which acts as an agonist for the type 2 cannabinoid receptors. Now, we all know from all the hype that's going on at the moment how useful cannabinoids are in reducing anxiety. So this is important in the physiopathology of anxiety. It's also active, copaiba is also active in the inflammatory processes. So in the emotional sphere, copaiba can help raise self-esteem, it can help strengthen emotional bonds, and it can help reduce anxiety, for example, like separation anxiety. Now, I've been experimenting with this oil, and so far it has been chosen by animals with heart and skin problems and those suffering from hyperexcitability. Just an aside here, when we say that the main component of copaiba is an agonist for cannabinoid receptors, to be an agonist in neuroscience is that it's a chemical that binds to a receptor and activates that receptor to produce a biological response. So the agonist provokes a response and an antagonist blocks the action, and therefore it has the opposite effect. But that's really not important for you to understand at this stage, just to know that copaiba is a useful oil to have in your kit, as it may be helpful to your animals. Frankincense. Now, frankincense, this is a well-known oil, and it's very useful in cases of anxiety because it helps to set up a barrier between the animal and the environment that it's in, which may be causing it stress. A 2008 study done on mice showed that the component responsible for this anti-anxiety effect was insensol acetate. So we therefore now know from scientific research that it does definitely have this anti-anxiety effect. Frankincense is also useful when the anxiety is giving rise to diarrhea, which is a very common symptom of anxiety. And also anxiety affects the respiratory system. It deepens the breathing. And we all know that when any animal, ourselves included, become anxious, our breathing becomes much more shallow. So if by taking the sniffing or inhaling the frankincense, the animal's breathing deepens, then that in itself is a way to contribute to helping the animal calm down. Geranium, is useful As we know from previous studies, geranium is very useful for hormonal things. So anxiety, which has a hormonal basis, geranium is an oil, a good oil to offer, and one that animals often choose, particularly females. Males, on the other hand, are more responsive to bergamot. So, but like bergamot, geranium oil has a balancing effect on the body and on the mind. It regulates the hormones, particularly female hormones, and it therefore is one of the oils which women often use for menstrual and menopausal problems. Also, bitches in heat or when they have just whelped may often display anxious behavior. So geranium is a useful oil to offer to them. I mean, bitches because we're talking about dogs, but any female animal who is in heat or has just had pups or foals or whatever, geranium is a useful oil to offer to them. Also, we know most of our bitches these days are sterilized. So, and sterilization, the whole procedure causes hormonal disturbance in the animal. So geranium oil is a useful one to offer to help balance or redress that hormonal disturbance and imbalance. It can also, we can remember that even although bitches have been sterilized, they may show signs of, when their cycle would be coming onto heat, other dogs may be able to detect this. So offering them geranium oil at that time might be a useful thing to do. German chamomile, like Roman chamomile, as we've said just earlier, blocks the glutamate receptors, and because it's blocking them, they are not able to activate the neurons, and therefore that has a calming effect. German chamomile also has another pathway of action, which we've seen, because it inhibits the general anxiety disorder and thus increases GABA levels. So German chamomile is therefore working on two levels. It's blocking the glutamate on the one hand, and it's helping to increase GABA levels on the other. So you get a double action there. Hemp, which is hemp is cannabis sativa, and therefore belongs to the cannabinoid family. And it's available as a vegetable oil and as an essential oil. So the essential oil is more indicated when we're dealing with problems of anxiety or nervousness, because it is a powerful sedative and also an anxiolytic. Animals that select hemp essential oil also often choose valerian at the same time. And so this synergy of valerian and hemp is very tranquilizing. When they want to liberate negative memories, which may be causing anxiety, they may also select linden blossom, neroli, mimosa, rose, angelica, along with the hemp. So always remember that it's a good idea to not just offer one single oil if we know that there is another oil which may make a synergy, which would be helpful. The vegetable oil of hemp supports the nervous system. So it is often chosen by animals who are suffering from anxiety because it induces a feeling of peace and tranquility. So that's a useful, you've got the two options there. You've got the essential oil and you've got the vegetable oil. Hops, which is the main ingredient of beer, as we know, has been classified since 1990 in the cannabis family, because studies done showed that the DNA of hops and cannabis sativa, or hemp, share a variety of aspects. Now, this is interesting because before 1990, hops had been classified in the nettle family. So this study shows that hop shares many of the anti-anxiety properties of hemp. So it's also sedative, it inhibits a general anxiety disorder, and therefore helps to increase GABA levels, which helps in its turn to reduce anxiety. So it calms hyperactivity and excitability, which may be the result of this state of anxiety with the animal running around restless and so on. Jasmine is a profoundly comforting oil. It can help alleviate boredom and anxiety, and this is important for animals in captivity, in shelters, or in rescue, where there's a total lack of stimulation in many cases, and this lack of stimulation leads to frustration and anxiety. Jasmine oil is also a nurturing oil because it produces a sense of warmth, a feeling of security, and that helps reduce feelings of anxiety and the possible obsessive compulsive behaviors which you often see with animals in shelters or in closed quarters where they're pacing round and round their little enclosure, or they're running after their tails, or so on. Lavender, we all know that lavender is a very comforting oil, and lots of people put it on their pillow so that they can go to sleep. So it helps to reduce anxiety and promote sleep, and sleep, as we know, is really healing, because during sleep animals can process things which they cannot do when they're awake, and therefore it's a very healing process to be able to sleep and get over something. Someone I know recently adopted a dog from a shelter, and the first 3 days all that little dog did was sleep. So it was recovering from the stress of having been in the shelter environment. Linden blossom is a very useful oil for animals that have suffered abuse of any kind. These animals often become shut down. They become introverted, and they can show signs of chronic anxiety, and either they become introverted and shut down, or they become reactive. So this means that linden blossom is an important resource for people working in shelters or in rescue. Again, we've seen that synergies can happen, and linden blossom is one of these oils that can be offered with other oils to release and heal trauma of past abuse. For example, rose and angelica might be two or other oils that we might want to offer. Neroli. Neroli is the essential oil from the flower of the bitter orange tree. This oil has an antispasmodic effect, which makes it very useful when anxiety is affecting the digestive system, like colic or diarrhea brought on by stress. A study carried out by Korean scientists on 83 subjects suffering from hypertension offered a blend of lavender and a blend of lavender, neroli, ylang-ylang, and marjoram. So the subjects used inhalation only. So that means it's important for us because it's very similar to what we do in zoopharmacognosy, where the animals are inhaling or sniffing. And after inhaling the blend, the cortisol markers, which are the indication of stress, improved, and the blood pressure of these people decreased. So here again, we have validation of the importance of and the usefulness of neroli in cases of anxiety. Tobacco. Now, tobacco is not perhaps one of the things that we might immediately think of. The main psychoactive component of tobacco extract is nicotine. As we all know, the great anti-nicotine campaigns. But the main area of action of nicotine is in the area of cognitive function, memory, and learning, which is why these days work is being done with it on people suffering from Alzheimer's disease. So anxiety and stress often diminish the ability to concentrate. So tobacco would be an oil to offer to animals who are suffering from these symptoms due to their anxiety. It's also useful for elderly animals who are beginning to show signs of dementia, which can also lead to anxiety because they may become disoriented and so on. And it has also been shown that animals often choose hops and tobacco together. Now, passionflower, the best known properties of passionflower vegetable oil are that it's anti-inflammatory, it's sedative, and it's antispasmodic. So the antispasmodic effect is useful when the animal is suffering from diarrhea or colic due to anxiety. Now, a study carried out on passionflower and linden blossom oils confirmed the sedative properties of the two main components of these oils, which are benzaldehyde and benzylic alcohol. So this sedative effect makes passionflower a useful oil to offer again in cases of anxiety, especially as it allows the animals to relax and to get some sleep. And the other thing about passionflower, which we've mentioned earlier, is that it makes it easier for GABA to bind to the GABA receptors. And by doing this, it stops the neurons from firing and therefore contributes to reducing anxiety. Roman chamomile. Well, Roman chamomile's calming qualities are well known, and particularly in the Mediterranean region, it's used all the time as an infusion. It has a profound effect on the nervous system, and again, it fosters sleep and relaxation. We mentioned at the beginning that Roman chamomile blocks the glutamate receptors, which means that it's useful in cases of anxiety and nervousness because it stops the neurons from firing. And animals of a nervous temperament often choose this oil. So the esters, which make up around 75% of this oil, calm the nervous system and are the ones responsible for the strong antispasmodic effect. So, as we've said, this means that the oil is useful for digestive disorders as a result of stress or anxiety. And so when the anxiety is leading to these physical problems, then Roman chamomile would be a good oil to offer to the animal in case it wants to choose it. It's also a good oil to offer when the anxiety gives rise to skin disorders, which often happens. The animal may get red, the skin may become red, it may become itchy, and so on. St. John's wort. Now, St. John's wort in human antidepressant work is well known. It has antidepressant effects and sedative effects. And one of the main components responsible for this effect is called hypericin. But it's been discovered that another component of St. John's wort, which is called hyperforin, may be even more effective than hypericin. But hyperforin is highly unstable, so it's got to be kept in a carrier oil, or you must use the plant freshly cut. And that's good because how we use St. John's wort is as an oil. So because the component is in the carrier oil of the macerated oil, then the hyperforin remains intact. So hyperactive and anxious animals often choose St. John's wort, and they may start off taking a higher dose, and as their anxiety decreases and they become more confident, they will begin to take less and less. So the effect that it produces may be due to the fact that this plant increases serotonin and noradrenaline levels, which are the opposite of cortisol. So these are the calming hormones in the brain. So serotonin also reestablishes neural communication. And this is important because anxious animals, as we've said, often suffer from lack of concentration. If they're suffering from lack of concentration, they're not thinking, and therefore what we want is to bring them out of the reactive state and bring them into a thinking state. And the serotonin in St. John's wort can help them to do this. But we must always remember the precautionary protocol when offering St. John's wort, because this is the only oil that we use where there is a 24-hour window before the animal is able to self-dose. So we would not, as you must remember, allow the animal to take more than about 20 milliliters on the first take. Spikenard, due to its calming properties, is a useful oil in cases of anxiety. It belongs to the same botanical family as valerian and is sometimes known as false valerian. And cats often choose it in preference to valerian, so it's a bonus to know something specifically good for cats. Because, as we know, cats can be much more choosy than other species, particularly dogs or horses. And therefore, having something which they would specifically want can be useful. The aroma is very comforting and it affects the mind and the nervous system. So spikenard then is a useful oil because, again, it is one of these oils like jasmine, which is very comforting. Just thinking of the flower, that tall spike flower with this strong aroma and perfume. It's a warm kind of perfume and aroma, so that means it's comforting. And the last oil that we're looking at here is valerian, which, as we know, is well known for its sedative effect, and many people take it. So it exercises a sedative effect on the central nervous system, although it also stimulates the digestion and the cardiovascular systems. And it works by inhibiting the general anxiety disorder, thus allowing GABA levels to increase. And if GABA levels increase, then the neurons don't fire, and therefore anxiety is reduced. So as we've seen, it also makes it easier for GABA to bind to the GABA receptor. So it's working on it's a two-pronged way of working. On the one hand, it's inhibiting general anxiety disorder, and on the other hand, it's facilitating GABA binding to its receptors. And also, since the oil is obtained from the root of the plant, it's an excellent grounding oil. Anxious animals are often way up there. As we've said, they're not thinking, they can't concentrate, they're completely spaced out, and therefore what they need is to be grounded. So an oil like Valerian, which is coming from the root, is an excellent grounding oil. Angelica oil, which, as we've mentioned, is a good oil for releasing, is also an oil made from root. So you might want to offer both of these oils and see one to release past trauma and anxiety, and the other one to help ground the animal in the present moment. So these are the main oils that we use in zoopharmacognosy for anxiety. And I would suggest that you experiment with them. See which ones your animals choose more frequently. I also suggest that you keep notes on what you do, and if possible, video it, because that helps you then later on to see what the animal's response was, and you can help, and that can also help you then in the future deciding which ones might be more useful for that particular animal. However, we mustn't think that what one animal chooses is what every animal is going to choose. We know that every animal is a universe in itself, and every animal is unique. So you have to offer a variety of things and see which one each animal would want to choose. So I hope you have enjoyed this webinar. I hope you will find the information useful and that you'll be able to practice it with the animals that you have at home or that you are working with. Thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you. Bye.